One of former Vice President Mike Pence's top aides, in fact, it was actually his chief of staff for 2 years, Marc Short, recently testified in front of a grand jury that is investigating Donald Trump and several of his other confidants' involvement in the events of January 6th, before, during, and of course, after. Basically, this is the DOJ's probe into the Donald Trump attempt to steal the 2020 election. And Marc Short was videoed last week exiting the courthouse where the grand jury is there. His lawyers were with him, and he has now confirmed to the media that yes, he was subpoenaed by the grand jury. Yes, he cooperated. And he says that is all he is allowed to say. So we don't know what Mr. Short, again, who was Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff for 2 years, had to tell this committee. But we do know, of course, that if anybody had information about Mark Meadow's activities, Donald Trump's activities, and of course the efforts to pressure Mike Pence into overturning the election results during the Electoral College certification, Marc Short would have been the guy. But again, he can't say anything about that. But you know what he can say something about? Matt Gaetz. As I'm sure by now everyone is well aware, I covered this over at Ring of Fire yesterday. Matt Gaetz, over the weekend at the Turning Point Action Conference, claimed in a butchered joke that he actually stole from George Carlin that some women, particularly those protesting the overturning of Roe versus Wade, are just too darn ugly to ever get pregnant. And Marc Short appeared on CNN this week after, of course, testifying in front of that grand jury, where he took a shot at Matt Gaetz, because Matt Gaetz also, by the way, took a shot at Mike Pence, saying he's a good guy, but he'll never be president because he's not a leader. So here is what Marc Short had to say about Matt Gaetz's future, since he's prognosticating about Mike Pence's future. Short had this to say. Well, I don't know if Mike Pence will run for president in 2024, but I don't think Matt Gaetz will have an impact on that. In fact, I'd be surprised if he was still voting. It's more likely he'll be in prison for child sex trafficking by 2024. And I'm actually surprised that Florida law enforcement still allows him to speak to teenage conferences like that. So I'm not too worried about Matt Gaetz, thanks. Now, Mr. Short does in fact have a point. You know, Matt Gaetz is under investigation for potentially traveling across state lines with a minor and having sex with her. And under the laws here in the United States, that would be identified as trafficking. So that's a big problem for Matt Gaetz. Of course, we've discussed everything that has happened with that particular case. But it does raise an interesting point that Marc Short hit on right there. Why is Matt Gaetz allowed to go out and speak to a conference of teenagers? Because that's pretty much what it was over the weekend. And of course, Matt Gaetz has spent the following days harassing a 19-year-old, not a minor, but still a teenager, on Twitter because he believes that she exemplifies his claim that women are too ugly to get pregnant. And she, of course, has fired back. She has prevailed in that Twitter feud, by the way, doing a phenomenal job of taking down Matt Gaetz for the disgusting slime ball that he is. But I do think Marc Short, in addition to calling him out for being allowed to be around teenagers, which of course he shouldn't be, but makes a good point about where Matt Gaetz might be in the future. And unfortunately, Matt Gaetz is probably going to win his primary, which means he's definitely going to win his seat back in Congress. But the question of how long he holds that seat is still up in the air. Greenberg will be sentenced in December of this year, so Matt Gaetz doesn't have to worry about any revelations coming out likely before the election. But before he's sworn in for an additional term, things could get pretty messy for him. So Matt Gaetz ought to just worry about his own future and leave Mike Pence out of the conversation. But of course, all of this is from Marc Short, Pence's former chief of staff, who not only has time to correctly call out Matt Gaetz, but is also fully cooperating with the Department of Justice in their attempts to take down Donald Trump and his allies. So, Marc Short, I'm sure we disagree on every single political issue, but I will say, you've done some pretty good work in the last week and a half, and I got to give you credit for that. Hey everyone, this is Aspen. And did you know that for the low cost of $0 per day, you can subscribe to the Fair and Balanced YouTube channel? We also encourage you to like, comment, and share, but again, click that subscribe button and help Aspen not be so grumpy.